Hello, everyone. Um, Thank you for being in the audience today. I know I look a little different than my picture on the website, and that's because when I turned 65, I decided to embrace my age, including my gray hair. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I'm here in Chicago, which is still quite cold yet, at the end of winter, and looking forward to spring. I hope everyone is healthy and safe, and I hope in the future I can be with you all in person. I know that would be great fun, and we all need more fun in our lives during this time. So there's a few questions here I want to address, and please do write your questions into the chat. So one question is, how can you include contextual or learning opportunity factors into the identification process? Isn't talent identification exclusive by nature? It's a really, really good question, and it gets at the heart of the issue. So context really, one of the things we've learned from research is that context affects the opportunity for children to develop their talent. We know this, we characterize it as socioeconomic status. We refer to children who have fewer opportunities as, quote, disadvantaged. So context, we can't eliminate it from our considerations of who's gifted and talented, and we certainly can't eliminate it from our considerations about identification and programming. So some of the techniques that I spoke about in the talk take into consideration context. That's the whole goal of universal screening. So universal screening is meant to capture kids that might be missed by teachers because their context doesn't necessarily bring them to the attention of the teachers based on their performance. Local norms does the same thing. Local norms takes into consideration the fact that kids differ in their opportunities to learn, and that opportunities to learn greatly affect any kind of academic performance. So we use norms, local norms, to better ferret out kids who are doing well compared to kids who come from similar backgrounds and have had similar opportunities to learn. So those techniques are designed to take into consideration context. Now, I think one of the reasons there's pushback on the approach of using local norms or using generous cut scores and using lower criteria is that, at least I hear this in the US, is that parents and teachers worry that you're watering down the gifted program if you do that. And that's where the issue of gifted services rather than gifted programming comes into play. So I am not saying that we don't identify or serve children who come to school already needing acceleration in math or language arts or other subjects, who are already way above grade level. We have to serve those students too. That's part of what we do. And we also have to serve those students who have potential that's not yet demonstrated in high achievement. So it's not an either or, it's an and. We serve both, recognizing that we have variation among gifted students, and they're not all the same. They don't come from the same backgrounds, and so we have to have a range of services, ones that are ready for kids who already need to soar ahead. They're ready to be doing above grade level work. They're highly motivated, they know a lot, they have good skills, and also services for kids who don't. If we are ever going to increase the diversity of kids represented in our programs, then we have to do both. I would also say that I know our audience comes from many, many different nations and countries, but all of us have groups within our nations, groups of students who are underrepresented. A lot of times it's because they're newly immigrated to our countries, they're language learners, they're just learning the language. And the other thing about context is to use technique to understand the cultural backgrounds of students and perhaps use that as a clue to who might be exhibiting exceptional ability. So for example, in the US, a large part of our immigrant population's Spanish is their first language. And so when they come to school, we have them in programs to teach them English. And there's variation in how fast English is acquired. So the rate at which, for example, a student is acquiring a new language may be an indication of exceptional ability. So again, these kind of cultural considerations take into consideration context. So another question is, how do you deal with parents whose kids would fit great into the gifted program, but the parents are against it? Yeah, that's a real issue. So when we started Project Excite, that was one of the things we were concerned about, because parents, many of the parents in Project Excite didn't necessarily have the best school experiences themselves. So they were reluctant to engage their child in something that was unknown to them, and they weren't quite sure was worth the effort. And frankly, that required them to, drive their child on Saturday mornings to classes or rearrange their schedule so their child could participate in after-school activities, etc. And so we enlisted the aid of teachers to talk to parents, and we asked parents to give us a chance to see how it went, to allow their child to participate, and if they didn't think it was worthwhile, they could always pull their child out. But in reality, what happened was parents became very, very strong advocates for their children. In fact, it was one of the things that became difficult to manage because the parents eventually wanted us to do something for their other children. So they would say to us, this is great, my child's in Project Excite, but I have another kid who's younger and that child needs something too. What can you do for them? So they became very strong advocates. My experience with parents is that sometimes they're fearful of the school system, they lack trust. And so one-on-one relationships with parents can be really important. And building trust may require home visits with parents, where the teachers go or the program administrators go and encourage them to let their child participate. A key is to have program administrators who will take the time and energy to really engage with families one-on-one and build trust over time. And then also, we started to use parents who did have their kids in the program and felt okay about it as ambassadors to recruit other to talk to parents who were more reluctant to have their children involved. And that helped a lot because the parents really trusted the other parents even more than us at the time. So that helped to recruit them. So another question is, what about kids who are underachieving at the time of screening? What do you do about them? So yeah, that's a real problem because then you have the problem that you can't even see necessarily their potential. So my best advice on this, I don't have any great answers, is that when you're doing your screening process, if there's any evidence from a teacher or a school psychologist or anyone, even a parent, that a child is doing work outside of school that is indicative of interest and motivation and talent, that you accept those indicators as part of your screening process. So there are kids who don't achieve in school, but they do a lot outside of school. In fact, there was a study by the MacArthur Foundation in the US where they studied kids who were very involved in doing things like creative writing on the internet. Kids were participating in history clubs where they were, watching TV historical movies or series like Game of Thrones and writing about it and researching aspects of it. Kids who were involved in service learning, kids who were involved in making movies in these online communities. And they found that there were kids who were very engaged in that kind of work, but they weren't necessarily achievers in school. They were achieving outside of school. And the goal was to the goal of the project was to re-engage kids in school achievement. And the way they did that was to help teachers identify these kids' interests outside of school and then sort of capitalize on them in school to get the kids involved in doing their work in school. And so teachers might, for example, have the child share their creative writing in school. So the idea was to link outside of school learning with in-school learning as a way of re-engaging students. But I would say the general recommendation is to look broadly for aspects of students' achievement, including what they do outside of school, and also to include parents in the nomination process to some extent, to the extent that you can, and include underachievers in your program. Give them a chance, at least at the younger ages. At older ages where motivation and persistence are needed, that may not be possible, but it is perhaps with programming for younger students. So here's another question. Which factors like teacher referral or local norms are best to combine so that you get the most diverse student ratio included for talent development? So here would be my plan. It would be to universally screen, first of all. So start maybe with your second or third grade, second year of school, third year of school. Look at all kids on some measure that you have, and screen widely for 25 to 30% of your population. And then if you do further assessment, use a local norm. So look at your distribution of scores and where are the splits? What is the average level of achievement for the students? And then where are your highest scoring students? It may not be in somewhere in the 90th percentile or even the 80th percentile, but where are they? And then select those students for your program. And I would use teacher referral as an add-on. So then show the teachers the kids that have been selected based on those procedures and ask them, is there anyone you think we missed? Is there anyone else you would recommend that we missed, and include those children? So you have to use a combination of those strategies is really best. So I want to tell you that if you go to Prufrock Press, Prufrock Press, and search for local norms, there is a tip sheet on how to use them. You can actually put in your students' data and they can help you determine what your local norms could be. And there's also a website for Scott Peters, and his articles are referenced in my PowerPoint. And he also has a worksheet so educators, teachers can put their student data into this worksheet and use it to determine their local norms. So there's two good resources for people to use where it's all set up for you to enter your student data, and you can figure out what local norms might be best. Another question is, how do you avoid parental protests about the selection of students for talented programs? Well, this can go either way. Sometimes the protests can be that you're watering down the program by including students who have lower levels of performance, and sometimes it can be you're overly restrictive in who you're selecting. The thing that I think works with parents is to show them, or to present to them the strong rationale for why you're doing what you're doing. So if your program is highly accelerated, where you're compressing several years of learning into one, or you're doing a very fast-paced program, then it's important that you have selection criteria that are going to be fairly high and rigorous, because that leads to student success. So showing them that you have carefully looked at the relationship between your identification criteria and student success is what's, I think, most helpful. A lot of times, in the US at least, gifted program coordinators want to hide their selection criteria from parents because they get so many phone calls from parents who question them and so on and so forth. But that just leads to more questions, in my opinion. So the best thing to do is to be as transparent as possible and to collect the data that shows that the students that you're selecting based on the criteria are being successful. Knowing that it's your obligation to constantly evaluate those criteria and tweak them so that you can justify your criteria to parents. Similarly, if you're doing like an enrichment program, you want to be sure that you're evaluating your criteria. Okay. Could fit all needs. Okay. So someone's asking me about universal design. So I think universal design is I'm not that well versed in it, so I don't want to pretend. I think it applies to any programming, so I think it's probably okay in terms of assessing instruction and whether it's appropriate for the students. I'm not an expert on this. That's about all I can say. And I think one more question. Do you think gifted programs should continue to assist gifted students even after they leave school? I think that we should have articulation between different levels of schooling. So it would be best if, for example, there was a lot of communication between, like in the US, it's, K-8 schools or middle schools, 5 to 8, and then the secondary school, so that we understand, the feedback loop should be that we understand, are the middle schools or the elementary schools, the primary schools, are they preparing students well enough to be successful in the secondary schools? And are the secondary schools preparing students well enough to be successful in college programs? For low-income students, the support, I think, is even more critical because the transitions from, the research shows, from middle school to high school, even for kids who have done well in middle school, can be very difficult, and kids can flounder in that transition. And similarly, the transition from secondary school to college, that's where kids can flounder. So programs that provide mentoring that goes across school levels, I think, can be very helpful and would be a very good strategy to implement. And I think we're out of time. But I want to thank you all. This was great, and I enjoyed your questions, and I hope it was helpful to you. Thank you so much.